Well, my topic is about resuscitation and many aspects of it and things like that. But the term resuscitate means to revive back to life is the definition of it. And we'll talk about some of those things there. And there are many different types of resuscitation. And when you go to the hospital, when you check in, one of the things they ask you is, do you want to be resuscitated? In fact, there was a law passed in 1990 by Congress that started that process going. It's kind of a legal requirement. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about what it is, what's involved with it, maybe how successful it is, those type of issues like that. But before I get into the details of it, I just want to point out that this has to be discussed and thought about and worried about ahead of time. Because if you're being resuscitated, you're not awake. You're not talking. So as a result, you're going to have minimal input to this process. And so you want to talk about it, think about it, plan about it ahead of time. Because you're not resuscitating if you're talking. So this is something that's very important to discuss with your family. There are actually legal documents that you can get signed, called advance directives and things like that. Many people go to their lawyers and get these things filled out and sign them up. There you go. And get these things signed up and filled out and have these papers. And you can get somebody designated your healthcare representative, and that person can talk for you when you can't talk. And these are all good things and stuff. And that's a very appropriate thing to have happen. It's also very binding legally. If you actually sign these things, it is a legal document, and it's supposed to be followed. But does that really work out that way? The answer is no. And in fact, they had a study recently in which they had a bunch of people who had these directives and had these instructions and did these things. And because when you're brought to the hospital or something happens to you and you're out, people don't know what your wishes are. So the assumption is, well, let's do something first and ask questions later. Also, you have to remember these documents are in your medical record at your doctor's office. Well, with the electronic medical record, your medical record is probably about 800 or 900 pages. It's filed under miscellaneous, and unless you happen to be arresting between 8 and 5 when the doctor's office is open and you can get the receptionist on the first call, nobody knows what your directives are. I mean, you have no idea. There was a very interesting case recently in California where some lady collapsed in the nursing home, and there was quite a to-do about it because this is a licensed medical facility, and the nurses didn't perform any resuscitation efforts whatsoever, which I guess, I don't know the laws in California, but I think a general expectation is if you're in a medical facility that people would give you medical care, which was strange, I thought. I'd love to know the legalities of that. If that was legal, like not to do it or something, whatever. Before I get into some more details, though, and since this is a Catholic hospital, and I want to make some good brownie points, I'm actually going to start my talk with a verse from the Bible. This is Matthew 25. Then shall the kingdom of heaven be likened unto 10 virgins, who took the lamps and went forth to meet the bridegroom. And 5 of them were wise, and 5 were foolish. They that were foolish took their lamps, but took no oil with them. But the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. While the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight there was a cry made, Behold, the bridegroom cometh. Go you out to meet him. And all the virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said unto the wise, Give us of your oil, so we can light our lamps, because they had gone out. But the wise answered, saying, Not so, lest there not be enough for us and you as well. But go ye rather to them that sell and buy for yourselves. And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came. And they that were ready with him went into the marriage, and the door was shut. Afterwards they came also the other virgins, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. But he answered and said, Verily I say unto you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for ye know neither the day nor the hour wherewithin the Son of Man cometh. And of course, that's an analogy for our death. And we're all going to go. It's no surprise, although when it happens, 99% of people and families are always surprised. There's nobody's getting off the planet alive. I mean, that's just a fact. I did pull up some statistics, because when are you going to die? I don't know when I'm dying. You don't know when you're dying. Nobody knows when you're dying. How unpredictable is your death? Well, let's look at the top 10 causes of death. And this is from the CDC. Just give you an example. Heart disease was number 1 and killed 600,000 Americans. Cancer is the Avis of diseases, number 2. They try harder. They're at 574,000. Emphysema, 138,000. Stroke, 129,000. Accidents, 120,000. Alzheimer's, 84,000. Diabetes, 69,000. Kidney failure, 50,000. Influenza and pneumonia, 50,000. Suicide, 38,000. If you review that list, there's not many that you have any warning of. Number 1, heart disease. You don't know you're going to have a heart attack until you have it, so there's no warning there. Cancer, Joe will talk a little bit about it. For most people, they get a little warning. That's nice. You can make some preparations, talk about it. Cancer is a bad disease in some ways, but like anything else, it's good and bad. It's good that you are given a warning. You can have some time to make some planning. Heart attacks, nope, not much time for planning there. Emphysema, typically people suffer from emphysema for years and years and years and years, and then something happens to them, they get sick or they fall over and die. And so there's not a lot of warning there. Strokes, no warning of stroke. You just wake up with a stroke one day and you're shocked. Accidents, you don't plan any accidents. There's no smart accidents. You can have accidents, and if you survive, you always get, I told you so, you shouldn't do that. And if you don't survive, then you're in heaven, and all your relatives say, yeah, you dummy, you should have done that. So there's no warning there. Alzheimer's, well, even if you made plans, you forgot them, so you don't get that. Diabetes, yeah, troubles are coming there, so you have time to plan. Kidney failure, that's a progression, slow usually, so you have a little time to plan there. Number 9, influenza and pneumonia, once again, strikes out of the blue. And by the way, these are preventable, these two. If you get your flu shot and pneumonia shots every year, or when you're supposed to. And last, suicide. It's interesting that that's in the top 10. And although it seems preventable, because you can treat the depression that leads to suicide, the problem is people who are depressed don't think right, and so they don't make right decisions. Now there's some other weird diseases. If you go down on the bottom of the list, which used to be very common, for instance, deaths from polio, 0. That used to be pretty high. From measles, 2. Malaria, 10. Strep throat, 3. So those used to be real big things. We as the medical profession kind of knocked those out. We'll take credit for that. Thank you. But some of these other things, you don't have a warning. So if you don't have a warning, you can't really plan when it happens, and you really, really need to pre-plan, pre-think, pre-arrange, and talk about it. And there are, like I said, legal documents you can do, forms you can fill out, but it's a little more difficult than that. Really more difficult, because a lot of these things, it's just an emergency. It's happening. You're not prepared at the time. Now, when we talk about resuscitation, you're going to decide if you plan ahead whether to do it or not do it. One of the questions that Chris wanted me to address was really what is resuscitation. And there's several different types. Most common we think of as CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation. And the American Heart Association teaches classes in it. Has anybody taken those classes? All right, if you took it this year, it was different from 2 years ago, which was different from 5 years ago, which was different from 10 years ago, which was different from 15 years ago. And next year will be different again. And the reason is it's not that critical how you do it, it's just that you do it. But there's other forms of resuscitation. For instance, if you're very dehydrated, we can give you fluid, do what's called fluid resuscitation. You have be unconscious and have no blood pressure, we give you a bunch of fluid, you wake up. You know. If you bleed, we can give you blood transfusion to resuscitate you from hemorrhage. You can have a thermal injury where you fall in ice water and get hypothermia. We can warm you up and resuscitate you. Same thing, you can get overheating, cool you down, resuscitate you. And then there's some other more esoteric things. But basically, what we usually talk about is the CPR, and you're not a participant in that decision-making process because you're dead, and people are trying to make you undead. One of the questions people ask, well, how successful is it if you do CPR? Well, curiously, I actually found a study, because you see this on TV, you know, they're walking around, something's happening, it's usually some beautiful young lady who's 30, and she falls over dead and wonder, what kind of disease could she have at age 30? Whatever. And you always walk around with that makeup and outfit, you know, whatever. But, and it makes good TV, and these people fall over and they jump on there and they have the big drama and that kind of stuff. Well, in TV, somebody actually watched for a whole year, obviously a great job, I wish I had that job, and tallied up how many people collapsed and the resuscitation rate. And lo and behold, 75% of the people in TV were resuscitated. And the belief, there was an opinion study that was done, the belief of the American public is that CPR resuscitation is highly successful. Not so much, actually. The actual numbers, this is 2010 from the American Heart Association. And I'm going to get boring because it's a statistical table here. All right. If you have, and this is in the hospital, okay? This is not just walking down the street, okay? If you have a witnessed cardiac arrest in the hospital, they can resuscitate you 48% of the time, and 22% of those total people who have an arrest in the hospital will actually walk out of the hospital alive. If it's witnessed, i.e. the nurse is watching you, or you're in the hallway and some goofy doctor's walking by, or you know, the cafeteria worker happens to be there, whatever. If it's unwitnessed, it's the middle of the night, you're sleeping in your bed, and, you know, the rounds aren't being done, the success rate falls from 48 to 21%. The survival rate, 1%. That's pretty low. That's not good. That's in the hospital. Now, if you're walking down the street, and you're just walking around, and it's not New York City where people would just step on you if you fall over dead, you know? And people try to help you, and some bystanders help you. The success rate of getting you from that resuscitation is about 40%. The survival rate, though, is only 6%. And somebody said, well, 6% if you're not in the hospital, 1% if you're in the hospital. Is the hospital doing a bad job? No, the sickest people are in the hospital. So you know, that's why the percentage is lower. Now, and that's just with the regular CPR. Now, if you add defibrillation, which is the paddles, where you put the electrical paddles and zap them, the success rate goes up dramatically. And the success rate of resuscitating somebody from a cardiac arrest goes up about 74%. Survival rate goes up to 30%. Now, and that's, if anything comes out of the talk, if there's ever anybody who arrests or collapses or anything, you can do a CPR, that's great, you should do it, it's a wonderful thing. But the most important thing is grab the paddles and zap them. I mean, that's a really key thing. It really does work. Occasionally you have some strange things. Years ago I was at the VA hospital. I was a young in-training doctor. And he had some interesting characters who lived at the VA who, for whatever reason, decided they wanted to stay there, be sick, and never go home. One of them had been there 23 years. He was the record holder at our VA hospital. And so they'd always try to get these people out because they're just sitting in the hospital taking bed space, costing a lot of money. And so we as young doctors would try to get these people well and discharge them. Well, we got one guy well enough one time, so we thought, and we were discharged him, and he was very upset with us. So he went out to the lobby and fell over dead in the lobby. And unfortunately, an unexperienced person was going by, and he came out and saw this, and he grabbed the electrical paddles and put them on his chest and whacked him with it, and he jumped up, slugged him, and he goes, "What the F are you doing, man?" Because he was faking. But and if you get zapped with one of these things and you're not unconscious, holy smokes. But in normal circumstances, you want to try. You want to give him a zap. Now, when I was in training, doing advanced resuscitation was very exciting. And when you were a young medical student and you'd get that code blue and they'd send you somewhere, I mean, it was thrilling. I mean, you'd run down there, and of course, we were in an old hospital in Chicago and our elevators didn't work, so you'd run down the stairs, and then you'd run through the tunnel to the other hospital, and you'd run up the stairs, you'd get there, you're just about dead. Sometimes I looked worse than the patient, but you get there and we used to go and you give them all these medicines and stuff. "Nurse, give me a bicarb," and that was cool. You give a shot of this, "Give me this," and you do that, and you put the IV, and you do the CPR and all this kind of stuff, and it's really exciting and it's really thrilling. And then you'd zap them a couple times. If that didn't work, then you get a pig needle and you'd stick it in their heart and squirt some medicine in there. Wow, that was pretty cool. And, what else did we do? Oh, a couple of hospitals, then if that didn't work, you'd actually open the chest, open it up, get the heart, massage it. I missed out on that one. I was always disappointed. They don't do those things anymore. Just none of them work. Needless to say, it was a big mess, you know. We had one guy who actually stuck a needle in his heart. He somehow survived, except he kept complaining about his pain in his back, you know. And we never really told him why, because we think the guy put it too deep. Some crazy things. So, but in the initial CPR is what you learn from the American Heart Association. Do what you can. Success rate's not high, but it's not zero. And if you use defibrillators, the success rate goes up quite a bit, which is good. Now, when the medical team arrives, they do more things. They put a breathing tube in you, put oxygen in, breathe for you, give you some fluids, give you some medicine if your pressure's low. If your rhythm's goofy, they give you some medicine to correct the rhythms and all kinds of things like that. But the key decision is what you want to do, when you want to do it, and where you want to do it. And when you check in the hospital and they ask you about it, hopefully you've thought about it ahead of time, really what you want. The success rate, like I said, is not high. And for some people, if they're very ill, they're very infirm, they got a lot of things wrong with them, the last thing they want to do is if they're getting a fatal event, they have us correct that, you know? So for some people, they don't want to be resuscitated. And knowing that ahead of time is a really, really good idea. You can have all kinds of other problems that can occur concerning it. And the thing is, especially when you're old and infirm, you may not know what you want, you may not articulate to your family exactly what you want. And one of the big problems that I see is that even if you do articulate it, the message doesn't get sent. Classic example, mom or dad's old and sick and infirm, and it's usually the daughter who's taking mom or dad to the doctor, taking them to the hospital. They're in and out multiple times, doing all the work, getting the medicines, going to rehab, all that kind of stuff. And maybe they've had that discussion about whether they want to be resuscitated or not resuscitated. And, you know, they're in the hospital one time, and of course they ask the form and fill out the form, which is put in the hospital chart, which is probably about 2,000 pages. So it's not readily accessible either. And something happens, and you know, sometimes the resuscitation is done even if you didn't want it. But what typically will happen, unfortunately, for all involved, is that the elder person's in the hospital, they're sick, they're dying. Maybe they decide, well, we're not going to do an awful lot. We're going to let things go. We're not going to resuscitate you. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do that. And lo and behold, like hellfire from above, in comes the out-of-town relative who has not discussed anything with anybody. And they come in the middle of the night, they go right to the hospital, right to the hospital room. There's the poor parent, you know, there. The caregiver, usually the daughters, maybe down getting coffee or fall asleep at home or whatever. They come and raise holy heck. Oh, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. If you don't do this, I'm going to sue this hospital, blah, blah, blah. And suddenly all those decisions are reversed. Why? Because the person who has nothing to say or do about it doesn't know anything about the decisions. And they always say, you hear all these things on TV, oh, make these decisions, discuss it, write it up, you know, have your lawyer get these documents, have it in your chart, give it to your caregiver, give it to your designated health beneficiary. The key person to send that information to are the non-participants, so that they know who and what has been decided. And this is an error that I see universal in general practice. I mean, the caregiver knows exactly what the program is if you make these decisions, but the non-caregivers don't know anything. And because they feel guilty because they haven't done a damn thing for 2 years from mom or dad. They want to come in and do everything at the end, type of stuff. So it's very important when you have, if you do make decisions, if you do have papers, if you do have forms, you don't need to discuss it with these more distant relatives, because you discussed it with your caregiver, the person who's really working with it, but inform them of it. Even if it's a letter saying, hey, Susie's my designated healthcare designate, or she makes all the decisions, or hey, I'm not going to be resuscitated or something. But just send us a letter or something to the non-participants. That's always a really, really, really good idea. There are another general fact I would say is, you know, when you're talking about resuscitation, you're talking about trying to reverse a near-death experience, and that's more and more the realm of the elderly. If you look at your life expectancy tables at birth, in 1940 the life expectancy, and this is for both men and women, was 62 years. In 1950, 68 years. 1960, 69 years. 1970, 70.8 years. 1980, 73. 1990, 75 and a half. 2000, 76.8. 2010, 78.7. That's really stretching it out there. So more and more of these decisions, when you go into a hospital, when you go into facilities, when you're going to be having medical procedures, when you're going to be having surgeries, when you're going to be having illnesses, it's going to be made by the elderly, because we're getting very old very quickly. Social Security is really PO'd us in the medical profession. We're blowing up all their actuarial tables, because when they made Social Security, people didn't live very long. And they set the age at 65 for men, because you know what? Almost all of them were dead by then. So, hey, you didn't have to pay out much money. But we've screwed that up big time. Happily so. Happily so. And as you get older and more infirm, and some people start losing their mental facilities, they're just weak, they're frail, they're run down, it's kind of better to make these decisions and discussions not near the end, but ahead of time, so that you can be cognizant and really know what you're talking about, type of thing. And some of the elderly, of course, are very cognizant. I had a woman last year, she was in her mid-90s, sharp, healthy. Wasn't even on any medicine. I'm not sure why she's seeing me, what I'm gonna do for her in her mid-90s, I have no idea. But the caregiver daughter dutifully brought her in twice a year for her checkup on basically health. She had no diseases, I did, but she wanted her checked out. It's like, whatever. And the very elderly woman decided to have that conversation with me about her ideas, her advanced directives and things. And so we talked about, well, do you want to be resuscitated if you arrest? No. Do you want to be put on a breathing machine if you go into respiratory? No. We went through a whole bunch of things like this and all this thing. The whole time the daughter caregiver's getting sadder and sadder, and she has a tear and she's sad and all upset. And I said, well, you're sure about all your wishes? She says, absolutely. And she adds, I'm old, I've had a wonderful life. I'll be happy to go meet my Maker and be one with Him in heaven. I'll be really happy about it. And she paused. And I was, a little sad, a little taken aback. And then she goes, yeah, but maybe next year might be better.